Story of my life.
Great. Well, hello, Sam.
Hello.
Hi. I think y'all probably know me by now. I'm Vaughn Diaz. My mother is Yvonne Webb, who's a member of this congregation. Hope y'all know her. If you don't, you should. She's wonderful. I live in Durham, North Carolina. I'm a cookbook author and a radio producer, and I have the honor of being on stage with Sam Venable and my friend Craig, who's a fan, who's got some questions as well. So, you ready to hit it?
I guess.
So, Sam, your resume is miles long, and you have done all sorts of fantastic things with your career. You want to introduce some of those things to the audience?
Well, I'll don't get me started. No. I am a native of this area. I'm a native Knoxvillian. The only time I actually left East Tennessee was briefly. I did a short stint with the U.S. Forest Service in Idaho when I was in college, and then worked for another paper in Chattanooga briefly. But I have lived and worked in Knoxville, 99% of my career. I will tell you how I got into journalism is the Lord verily works in mysterious ways. I was on my way to getting a degree in forestry and wildlife management at the University of Tennessee. It's all I'd ever wanted to do. I hit in my junior year an advanced chemistry course, which was required. You got to know lots about cellular structure and how,
Sure.
all this. And statistics. If you're going to be in research, you got to understand statistics. I might as well run and hit that wall. There was no way that I was going to pass those two courses, which were required. And that failure, that quarter, we're on quarter systems, that failure would have drop-kicked me out of the University of Tennessee and landed me. Actually, I had a job waiting with the U.S. government. They were going to give you camouflage clothes and a free rifle and boots. And that really wasn't the problem because I was in advanced ROTC. That was not the problem. The problem was I thought they're going to draft me right here on the spot.
And what year was this? You said 1967?
That was 67, yeah. And so I was at my fraternity house with my head in my hands, probably into the third or fourth can of lemonade or whatever it was we had at the fraternity house that day. What can I do? What can I do? That's all I ever wanted to do was forestry. And I would try this, try that, try that. One of my fraternity brothers said, we shall not quote it directly here, close to it. He said, Venable, you are so full of bovine scatology. He said, you'd make a decent writer. You ought to try journalism. For lack of anything else, I had never worked on a high school paper. I had never done anything in journalism except the only thing you can even remotely say is when I was about 10 years old, for my older cousin who was a fisherman, I compiled this little book called The Lighter Side of Fishing, where I took all these stupid pictures and just glued them in a book and all that, and did not know how to type. I mean, nothing. I took one course, that elementary course in journalism, and as I say, it was Paul on the road to Damascus. I have never had a head smack epiphany in my life like that. And I said, whoa, I can do this. I switched from the College of Agriculture to, at that time, journalism was a school within the College of Business Administration. And you talk about a lost ball and high weeds. Any subject matter that I had that could transfer over from agriculture, I used as my electives. And I proudly say I have to be the only journalism graduate from the University of Tennessee whose entire elective schedule includes dendrology, silviculture, wood products,
What is dendrology?
game birds management, that type of stuff. I say I went from growing trees to writing on dead trees, paper. But in any event, I never look back. It was something that absolutely like a hand in a glove. And I just, from that moment on, I was writing, and I have never regretted 1 second of it. It's been a very fun career. I have been blessed. I have been on the longest leash of any supposedly staff member. Within 6 or 7 months of switching majors, I got a job we had 2 papers in Knoxville at that time, the Knoxville Journal. I got a job with them as a police reporter, stayed with them till I graduated, took a job at a paper in Chattanooga, and then within a year, I was contacted by the sports editor of the News Sentinel, my hometown paper. He knew my background in wildlife and fisheries and all this. And this was right at the cusp. It was in 1970, right at the cusp of the environmental movement and all that. And he hired me as their full-time outdoors editor. And Brer Rabbit got thrown into the briar patch. That's all you can say. Essentially, I got paid to hunt and fish and enjoy my life in the outdoors for 15 years.
Wow.
Until we changed editors, and the columnist, the general columnist for the paper that some of you in this audience may know, Carson Brewer. Y'all got some people here, natives. Carson was a dear friend. Carson was retiring the same time as when the new editor was coming in, and the new editor came over into sports, and he said, would you, by that time I was doing a lot of humor in sports. And he said, would you come over and just write for the whole paper? Would you like to do that? And I said, sure. I said, if I can still have the same non-schedule. I never worked a schedule.
Yeah.
I maybe in 15 years had 3 staff meetings. I mean, that kind of stuff. I was just on my own.
Lucky you.
And some of my best creative writing actually was doing expense accounts, that type of stuff. But yeah, and so I just switched over to that and just kept writing humor. And yeah, I did a lot of magazine work and all that, but 90% of it after I did the outdoor stuff was just straight humor, and I've loved it. And for some reason, people have bought it. I don't know why.
Oh, you're pretty funny. Just a little bit.
Well, I've had a great run. It's been fun.
Sam, before I turn it over to Craig, what are your, this is a terrible question, I recognize that up front. What are your 1 or 2 like absolute favorite stories that you ever wrote?
I get that story a lot. I get that question.
Yeah, it's a terrible question.
And I tell people it's like having a set of parents that have 50 children, and they say, which one is your favorite? I always say my favorite one is the one I just finished. Sure. But they run all over the spread. If there's anything that I will say I got the most personal reward from, it was a series that I ended up doing shortly before I retired. And it was not a humor series. It was a deadly serious series. All of my working life, as I said, I got hired there, this was in the late 60s. I had heard a story about a guy from Sevierville, which is near Knoxville, who was black, who was fishing in the Cherokee National Forest for trout with 3 white friends, and had been accosted by a local yokel down there that told him that if he didn't get out of there right now, he's dead. And, drove off. And his friend said, what are you going to do? And he said, keep on fishing. He said, he said, that's first, if I ran every time somebody threatened me. And later that afternoon, the guy shot him and tried to kill him. Hit him in the leg and knocked him down, and then fired another shot in the air and then ran. I heard that story off and on at the 2 papers I'd worked for. And every time I'd start asking questions. Everybody knew exactly who the assailant was and all that.
Wow.
Who did he shoot? Beats me.
Oh, wow.
Black guy, you know. And finally, for Black History Month in 2014, I said, I am going to go down. I knew the trial. The guy was arrested and charged with attempted murder. Took the jury 23 minutes to acquit him. You know, figure the era. And I said, I'm going to go down there and at least get that court report. I called the court clerk, who was familiar with the case. She said, it's somewhere, we've got it stored. And she said, I don't know what kind of condition it's in, but I'll be happy to get it for you.
Wow.
When I got down there to Madisonville, there she had it. And it had been in storage all those years. You know, the pipes had leaked all over stuff. It was bug eaten and all that. And I start peeling these pages apart. It's like onion skin, you know, and it's all sticking and everything. And I find the jurors, I find the judge, I find the sheriff, I find everything. And I keep looking, and I find the guy's name. Charles Orlando Molden. And it said Route 4 Sevierville. Okay, that occurred in 1968. The assault occurred in 68, about 6 days after Martin Luther King was killed. So you know where the tensions were running in this country then. Everybody in that case was dead. The sheriff was dead. The judge was dead. You know, everybody was dead. I was certain Charlie Molden was dead too. I got it back, came back to Knoxville. The internet can be your friend. There are times when you should not trust the internet one bit. But if you're judicious, the internet can be your friend. I started cross-referencing all this. And as I said, I just did a lot of that shoe leather journalism, you know, knocking on doors and stuff like that. And people knew it, and somebody said, you know, I think he's still living and all this. And finally, it was about a week. I'll tell you, I get emotional. I'm telling you, thinking about it. Whew, wait a minute. I came in my office that day, and my phone is blinking. And I just picked it up, and I hear this voice. And he said, this is Charles Molden. I understand you're looking for me. Holy bovine. I mean, what? And I made an immediate, I said, where are you? He was in Cookville. He lived in Oak Ridge. He's that close to me.
Wow.
But he was a construction manager, and he was working over there. And he came to my house a couple of days later. I tape recorded him. I said, Charlie, we're going up there. And by that time, I had told my editors what, and they said, quit your column, quit everything. Do not do anything but this. And it ended up, it was a 6-part series called Fragments of Hate. The guy still got the bullet fragments in his leg. And the most incredible story you could possibly imagine that occurred right there in East Tennessee. The press ignored it. Essentially, you know, the sheriff did his job, and the prosecuting attorney, I mean, the DA, he did his job. And the jury was 12 guys that were friends of the alleged assailant. And as I said, it took them 23 minutes. I have actually was able to find some old recordings of the testimony. This thing branched out. I mean, it was a researcher's delight to work on. And found some of the recordings and listened to some of the testimony even. And when Charlie showed up for the trial, and he was just right out of high school, and he's on crutches because I mean his leg really shot up. And he said he walked in, and he said there was this kindly, grandmotherly white lady standing right there. And Charlie went in, and he said, "Good morning, ma'am." And he said, he looked at me and said, "He should have killed you." And he said, "Well, welcome to justice."
Right. Wow.
And God had had a wonderful career. He was still in construction. He was a construction manager. His hobby had become car racing and all that. He had won a ton of stuff. And I mean, it's just amazing. Mm-hmm. And he told his story that I will tell you one other quick, and he told me over the phone, he said, yeah, he said, I graduated from Sevier County High School, I think 64, I guess, yeah. And he said, I was in the same class with Dolly Parton. And I'm thinking, Charlie, you couldn't have been in school with Dolly Parton then. I mean,
she's from Sevierville.
People of color, and Jerry Sherrod out there, and he can vouch for this. The first person of color I ever went to school with was when I enrolled in the University of Tennessee. Mm-hmm. That's how segregated things were. And this is long after, the laws had changed. But in any event, I'm thinking, Charlie, there's no way you could, he brought me his annual down. When his senior annual, and there's his picture, and he flipped, there's Dolly's picture, and I'm like, whoa. And so he was a football player, and we looked through the athletics, and they're great big double truck, open on the thing, athletics, and they had a picture of the team carrying their coach off the field, and Charles's face is right there in the middle of it. And he said, I think that's when we beat Young High School in opening game in 1963. Well, by now, and I looked over in the side, and Jerry, you'll recognize this name. I see this old dejected Young High player standing over there. I said, that's Dickie Black. And I said, hold on a minute. And here, once again, the goosebumps start coming up on my neck. I went up and got my annual from that year, and there's a team picture. I said, just see it's 66, that's Dickie Black. I said, see that little runt back there on the back? He said, yeah. I said, that's me. Same game.
Wow.
Same game.
Wow.
Now, can you imagine that?
Wow.
And I will say this, our high school beat reporter back in that day had covered that. We even had a story the day before, a short story, that said if Charles Molden plays, he will be the first, the first Negro is what they call it, first black athlete in the KIL, Knoxville Interscholastic League. Wow. And Charlie was telling me all these different things, and he told me about a touchdown he scored a game or two later. Microfilm, I look it up, the headline. Molden shows his speed and all that. I said, it was like, wow, how did this happen under everybody's nose? Mm-hmm. So that's a long story to answer your question, and I'm sorry. Never get a writer started on telling stories. I hope y'all brought your supper with you. We'll be
I had a feeling you'd had a good answer to that. Well, thank you for sharing that, and I'm impressed and I'm jealous of the journey, because that sounds like an incredible thing to get to explore.
As I said, my career has been so blessed. I was lucky to have, when I was in sports, to have a sports editor who let me do my thing, and I was so lucky when I switched over into the main part of the paper, the editor said, have at it. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you a funny story about that later. I mean, let's get on.
All right.
I know these people.
Is Charlie still alive?
Pardon?
Is Charlie still alive?
Still alive.
Yeah. Are y'all friends?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We talk to each other not a lot, every 3 or 4 months. Sure. One will call the other.
Sure. And he still lives in the area?
He lives in Oak Ridge.
Wow.
Yeah. Just amazing guy. Amazing guy.
I'm going to turn it over to Craig. You want to introduce yourself?
Lovely audience. A lot of you know me. I'm Craig Shook, member of the church, and we're honored to have Sam here.
Well, thank you. Happy to be here.
It's kind of hard to say anything after that story, but I was a journalist. My degree's in the School of Journalism at University of North Carolina, and I'm amazed at your keen sense of observation and the fact that you notice things that we all notice but don't put together, and that you can convey that in both the format of a column, and also a longer format, your introductions and things to your books, and Mountain Hands as well. So, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much for
Yeah.
having me. I'm sorry the weather conspired against us. But
I know, I thought we would be full, but nonetheless, we're elated that you're here. Why don't you talk a little about your newest book, which was published in March of last year?
Just happened to have a copy. No,
Look at that.
Most of my stuff, as anybody's read my material knows, I'm essentially a humorist, and I've been lucky that I've had 15 books published, and there's 2 or 3 of them. Well, some of them are out of print now. 2 or 3 of them are outdoor topics, outdoor humor, hunting and fishing, that type of stuff. With some, emphasis on environmentalism and that type of stuff. And the one serious book I wrote was called Mountain Hands, because I wrote it about my people, the people that I grew up with. These are people in 5 states of southern Appalachia, North Georgia, East Tennessee, western North Carolina, southwest Virginia, southeast Kentucky, all along the spine of Appalachia, that do some type of work with their hands, full-time, part-time, either as a craft, as an occupation, some of them with college degrees, some barely able to read and write, but they work with their hands. And my colleague at the paper, Paul Eford, one of the photographers, took all the photos, and the start of each chapter shows their hands doing something. And then I interviewed them and wrote their life story. And besides that, I tell people the alpha and omega of mountains. I have the serious book, Mountain Hands, and then I have a book called How to Talk and Write Good. And it's a hillbilly dictionary. I walk into Cracker Barrels and see these things, these dictionaries, how to speak Southern. We don't speak Southern here. This ain't Mobile, Alabama. We speak Southern Appalachese. And I have a whole stand-up comedy act that I do with that type of stuff. But most of my stuff, as I said, is humor. I just signed a book out there. Somebody brought me a book. It was published in 1988 called 2 or 3 Degrees Off Plum. And it's one of those nutty things. And I've got a book. I'd rather be ugly than stupid, with stupid misspelled. It's T-U-P-P-I-D. And this one is called Naked Dining is Not on My Menu. And Charlie Daniel, my dear colleague, Charlie and I worked on both papers. The Journal, I worked there, in school, and then came back, and then when the Journal folded, the New Sentinel hired Charlie. And as it turned out, at both papers, we were positioned like from here to there from each other. And we just hit it off. And so he is a delight. Anybody from East Tennessee will recognize a Charlie Daniel cartoon. And he illustrated it. But you got to come up with some kind of a catchy title.
Sure.
And that title comes from the lead story, the lead column that's in the book, and it's about I let the world be my straight man. That's the easiest way to find topics.
Sure.
And I just had seen a wire story that there was one restaurant in New York, one in London, and one in Paris, and I point out that was Paris, France, and London, England, not Paris, Kentucky, that type of stuff. And that one night a week cater to nude diners. And I thought, of 100 things I would rather not do, that would be number 101. I cannot imagine anything that, to me, is so... I just can't imagine. And so I just wrote that column, and that became, the lead in the whole thing. And I mean, how can you not find humor in that? And so that's and it's just me being me, and Charlie being Charlie. He did all the illustrations in it. But it's been a fun book.
Yeah. I'm curious, what do you think the role of humor is in our society today?
It's missing, sadly. we seem to have replaced in the mass media, and I'm very sensitive, and I'm sure you are too, about there is journalism, and then there is entertainment journalism.
Yeah.
There is news journalism and entertainment, quote, journalism.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people don't recognize the distinct difference between the two. But what used to be, in parody and satire and all that, and still is out there. I mean, it still exists. But almost every publication of general, whether it was a newspaper or magazine, they always had the lighter side. They had a humor column in there, something like that. And it was humor. And like Will Rogers he could zing people with humor, but it was not spiteful humor. It was not mean-spirited. And today, I found that many times what passes for humor is just bile and spleen, evil, mean-spirited type stuff. And that, I think just that ability to laugh at the world, laugh at ourselves. I mean, I make my guy, I'm the fall guy in a bunch of the stuff I do. That's the first outdoor book that the News Sentinel put out is called A Handful of Thumbs and Two Left Feet. And I'm happy to say that it's still in publication. It's been expanded over the years. But I wrote that book because at that time, I read these outdoor writers, and they always killed the biggest deer and caught the biggest bass, and they were so full of information. I was and am still a goof. I mean, I'm the guy that throws backlashes and misses a standing shot at 20 feet. I mean, and I think about 90% of most outdoor people are that way. And, I was just able to relate to that, and it's just about crazy outdoor happenings, and that kind of stuff. So anyhow, that's that.
I'd be curious to know what you thought about the movie Cocaine Bear. Did you hear about this movie?
Yes, I have not seen it. I actually have written about that Cocaine Bear.
Are y'all familiar with this movie? Apparently, it's very funny. There's based on a true story.
Yeah.
A large amount of drugs falls out of the sky, out of a plane, and is consumed by a bear, who then is on a rampage, and they've made a film about it. I also haven't seen it.
The film, I have not seen the film, but I understand it's grossly overrated. I mean, the poor bear died pretty quickly.
Yeah.
He took an overdose, so he wasn't alive long. But that's really not unusual. I have my own personal self. I was turkey hunting one time in the Cherokee National Forest, and that's where all this occurred. Cherokee National Forest is, like, 600,000 acres. It's a pretty big place. And up there just in the end of nowhere, I came across 2 or 3 cinder blocks all tied together with about 20 feet of yellow ski rope on it. And full well, it was a drug drop that maybe the bear didn't find that one. And right over here on Douglas Lake one time, probably 30 years ago, a friend and I were duck hunting back in one of those old secluded coves. And, you're camouflaged down on those mud flats, and we hear this, and here's a helicopter. And it comes down just right over the hill from us. And when it stopped, I could still see the rotor going like that. And it wasn't on the ground 30 seconds, I guess, a minute, something like that. And then right back up and went. I looked over, I said, "Joe, don't move." I said, it was a drug drop. And,
I had no idea that happened.
Yeah,
wow.
And,
The South is such a fascinating place.
I think it's not common, but it's certainly not unheard of.
Yeah. What do you think, Craig? You got more questions?
Well, first of all, Mountain Hands is one of my favorite of your books.
Oh, thank you.
It's not very funny, but
Oh, there's no, if you're looking for humor in that,
But
you're
I
not going to
love
find it.
you for saving some of the things like corn shuck dolls, and which is on the cover, the photograph. But the people who, as we become more homogenous in the southeast, well, the Appalachia and the southeast too, for saving their stories, and for also including not just East Tennessee.
Yeah.
So I do like that book quite a lot.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I wanted to make it this whole part of Southern Appalachia, you know, just try to get the people in it, each person is a different discipline. You know, there is one basket maker and there's one sculptor, that type of thing. Just gives a representation of each discipline of it.
In learning more about you, I don't know whether you ever went hiking with Carson Brewer, and that he was a big hiker. That you're part of the Friends of the Cumberland Trail.
Yeah, my wife and I
talk about that maybe.
Well, my wife and I, we're no longer on the board of the Friends. We served for quite some while on the board of Friends of Cumberland Trail, which is the Cumberland Trail State Park. It's a trail, it's a state park. But, you know, it's interesting you mentioned with Carson. Carson Brewer and I never hiked together. I mean, it's just really funny. I mean, I was in the outdoors, and Carson was writing a lot about the Smokies, and I pretty much just deeded the Smokies to him. I stuck more as far as the government part of the, you know, the whole border of East Tennessee and North Carolina is federally owned. The Cherokee National Forest on either side of the Great Smokies, and then the Nantahala and the Pisgah on the other side. There's over 2 million acres of public land that's your land and mine. It's Woody Guthrie stuff, you know. In any event, so Carson was mostly up there. Now, we were together a lot, you know, either at the newspaper and all that type of stuff. We'd see each other, you know, up here at the Museum of Appalachia and all that type of stuff. But I never actually hiked with Carson, but this church is interesting. This was Carson's church. And when Carson passed away, I can't remember the exact year, what was it? I've forgotten, 2003 maybe, something like that. It's on the back of that book if anybody's got it. His funeral obviously was up here. It was a snowy day. And I said to my wife, I don't care. If it worked out fine for what I wore, because it was a snowy day, but I said, I don't care if it was 80 degrees and sunny out there. I am wearing my hiking boots to Carson Brewer's funeral, you know. Just old testament to Brew, you know. But we compared notes on trails and all this, and I asked him so many questions about, he had a very popular trail guide that at his death, his widow, Alberta, who was a pioneering newspaper woman and her newspaper reporter, she opened a UPI office in Knoxville. You know, she granted, he had that trail guide that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. That thing the last time I had seen it, it was in its 125,000th, more than 125,000 had been printed. They combined it with some other stuff the University of Tennessee Press did, or maybe it's with trails. The Great Smoky Mountains Association has it now, which is Smoky's Life, I think. But we would compare trail notes and all this kind of stuff. And I said, we always called him Brew. That was his nickname. I said, Brew, did you ever, you're on the trail, did you ever see that hiking guide sticking, it was a foldable thing. You ever see that sticking out of people's pockets? He said, oh yeah, every now and then. He said, that's a nice stroke to your ego. I said, did anybody ever ask you on the trail about it? He kind of chuckled. He said, well, one time, and he named the trail. He said, I was just walking along by myself, and he said, the guy was sitting by the trail, and he had that thing out, and Bill Dyer, that I'm sure some of you might remember, was a cartoonist at the Journal. Bill had illustrated that. And he said he had that map out, and he would turn it this way, and he would turn it that way, and all that, and he looked very confused. And I said, what did you do? He said, I just walked right on by him. yeah, Carson was a super guy. And Alberta, as I said, she was a pioneer in journalism. In those days, anybody who was a girl reporter, a woman reporter type of thing. Now you talk about segregation. Alberta Brewer covered UT sports, as part of her, as part of her UPI duties. She would have football games, basketball games. She was, the press box was back in the day now. We're talking the 40s, early 50s and all this. She was only allowed to come into the press box after everybody else was in and seated. She could come in whatever that was. I took my pills and I still hear these noises. No, she could come in then, and she could not leave the press box until after the game. The men were able to come back and forth, go to the restroom and all that kind of stuff.
Rude.
But, that's the type of prejudice that women faced in journalism back in the day, and in many field lines of work. So, Alberta was she was a warrior. And the most how many of you knew Alberta? From anybody here? Yeah. She had that lilting, that South Georgia accent. She always called him Carson. She told me once about, they wrote that Valley So Wild together. Wonderful book about the whole folk history of the Little Tennessee Valley. And here are two journalists going together working on this, and they would go interview together and write their notes together and try to combine it. And Carson he did have a quick temper. I will say that. I think that must run in newspaper people for some reason.
Must be right about that.
Yeah, we're talking. Oh, yeah, I've written about mine several times. And I wanted my kids to get a complete education, for heaven's sakes. But that one time we were just signing books one time, and I said, how'd y'all get along with, writing that? And she laughed, and she said, well, now sometimes we did not agree very much on something. And one time Carson got so frustrated that he threw a dictionary at me. And I looked over there at Carson just sitting there, and I said, Drew, did you do that? He shrugged his shoulder, and he said, I thought she wanted it in a hurry. Wonderful couple, though. Great people.
I had the joy of taking Mr. Venable over and
Oh, don't call me Mr. Venable.
Sam over
That was my
to the wall in the fellowship hall we couldn't figure out what Carson was doing, but he's the only one in that photograph of the construction of this building.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, I became first familiar with you from, it's either in BIR or PBS, I think BIR, the Talk is Cheap.
Yeah.
At the Christmas thing with you and Bill Landry.
Yeah.
And two others whose names I can't remember. Any more of those ever, you think?
Oh, we did a bunch of those. This, for those of you who are around here, will be familiar with these names. Bill Landry, who had the Heartland series, and just a dear friend. And I'm telling you, that's just one of the most real people you will ever meet. What you see on that screen is what Bill Landry is. And we were doing a program up in Gatlinburg one time, and they had it was at the convention center up there, and they had some of the old Heartlands running. And there was Bill. He looked like he was 16 years old, dark hair, and he always had that red plaid shirt on. He's coming across there. Welcome to the Heartland series. He leaned over and he said, I had two of those shirts. He said, one of them always was dirty and one was always clean. He said, they were either one was in the laundry or one was on my back the whole time. Mm-hmm. But Bill put this thing together. He and I and a guy from up near Morristown, Jimmy Claiborne, a retired history teacher up there, who, if you talk to him, he still works at Dollywood now. If you talk to Jimmy Claiborne, you would think this guy fell off the last turnip truck that just got the oldest, countryest accent like that, you know. Did his graduate work at Harvard. I mean, he's smart as a whip, but that's just, and the funniest. I always said his delivery was like Jimmy Stewart. You know, he'd be talking and he'd get in, and I know every joke in his satchel. And we would sit backstage and listen to that, and all of a sudden I'd look at Bill, and he'd look, and I said, where's he going with this? It's not the way he normally tells it. But he'd just change it, and he'd always come back to the right punchline every time. And then we had a lady named Elizabeth Rose, who was at that time an elementary school teacher, a very talented singer. She sang mountain ballads and that type of stuff, and told stories through songs. And so Bill put this thing together. Oh, now, we did those things for, gosh dang, 4 or 5 years,
Wow.
I guess. And I mean, we did them all over this whole region. And it kind of fell apart. I mean, Bill moved away. Elizabeth took a different job, and it kind of got harder and harder to keep us together. And then COVID came along, and of course that just shot that in the head. But what Greg's talking about, we did a Christmas program down here at, the Museum of Appalachia. And it's just a program of Christmas humor. And I did this, one of my stand-up routines is a thing on Mountain Speech. And I have these flashcards. I've actually got part of it actually now on PowerPoint, which is certainly an alpha and omega thing. Hillbilly words on PowerPoint. But I tell this story, and I would tell it in the language of East Tennessee, and every time I would, I'd come up, like his aunt lived out in the country, and I'd hold up A-I-N'-T, his aunt, and all this type of stuff. And she lived a long way out of town. Now, it's a fur piece, and I'd hold up F-U-R-P-I-E-C-E, and, all of that. Just dumb, corn-pone stuff, but people seem to like it. And I love to do it in front of native audiences and also people who are not native. Because, oh boy, that's you're right for picking. When you see somebody out in the crowd, there's my mark. And I'll just say something about, I know they don't speak that way in Chicago. Don't worry about it. Somebody will explain it to you. But, yeah, we did that. And it's funny that you mentioned that show. I just did Wilderness Wildlife Week in Pigeon Forge about 2 weeks ago. I want you to know a woman came up there and she had it recorded on her phone there. She said, I want you to see my godson who has watched that thing 10 jillion times. And at Christmas, this past Christmas, he had performed that thing.
Wow.
That story I tell is how my buddy Cornel cuts his own Christmas tree, and he's in a state park and doesn't realize it and all this kind of stuff. And she starts showing it. And I was like, this is incredible. The kid, he even had my throwaway lines down, the spontaneous stuff that will come from the crowd.
Wow.
And he even had it, I've licked my fingers to pick up. He had the whole thing.
Wow.
And I said, I've never had my ego stroke so much. And I sent the kid a letter and a couple of books, and I said, hey, if I ever need a stand-in, I'm calling you.
I'm sure he loved that. Yeah. Sam, we are way over time. And but
Surprise,
everybody
surprise.
But the audience is so wrapped. I'd love to actually open it up to questions from y'all. Does anyone have a question for Sam? Something they're curious about?
I don't have a question, but I've got to compliment you on your impression of Alberta Brewer.
Well, thank you. I got ham in me. Nobody in my family ever had a real job. I'm a writer. My brother Ronnie in New York and his wife, both in the theater, been in the theater all their life. Our brother-in-law Tony was a touring operatic baritone. I mean, nobody had a real job. So I just think part of that hearing the voices and all, it's just, that just is in our genes. But thank you. I appreciate that. If you
It's
knew,
fun to hear her again.
yeah, if you knew Carson and Alberta, there were just no more two delightful people than they were.
May they
Super
rest.
folks. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. Wait till the mic gets up there.
Trust me. Okay. You had mentioned that writing things that are humorous and people don't get it anymore, and we've lost our humor. Part of that is because people have gotten so offensive. They get right on, I'm offended by that, you can't say that,
Yeah.
and they don't get the humor. How do you bring that back? How do we bring, as a community, bring it back?
It will eventually evolve back to that, I hope. When you look back in politics, in the history of U.S. politics even, goodness gracious, I mean, they were canings in the halls of Congress. People have been shot, you know. It was more physical then, and I guess it's getting that way now. I don't know. It just seems to think right now we are in an era where that type of behavior has been legitimized. I think it's one of those things that maybe simmers under the surface for a long time, and then along comes the situation that is now legitimate. That's, you know, to be that derisive and all that. And I hope we will evolve back to that. Yeah, nothing is forever, I hope. Anyone else?
You're never going to get this opportunity again. He's right here. He's so close to you.
Oh, they're just stunned. I know, I can tell. Let me tell you a quick story.
Yeah.
You have to understand, and I guarantee you, just looking at the age of this audience, you all will know what I'm talking about. When there was a time when there was no email or instant communication like that, one of the oldest tricks in daily newspaper columning, especially with humor, is to get a columnist in city A and a columnist in city B, not intentionally, but will provoke one another.
Nice.
One will write something about the other city, and then that person will write something about, you know, and they get these feuds going on. Mike Royko did that in Chicago a bunch, and different things. Dave Barry got it going once with a town out somewhere in North Dakota. And they named a sewage treatment plant after him. And he went out there. He went out there for the grand opening of the Dave Barry sewage treatment plant. What happened? This was eons ago. I say eons, but it was back in probably the mid-'80s. No, it was earlier than that, because I was still writing outdoors when this happened. In any event, I was flying back from somewhere, and I got stuck in the Charlotte airport, North Carolina. And you know, in those days, if the plane pulled away from the gate on time, that was an on-time flight. The fact that it stood 3 hours out there on the runway before it could take off did not count. Hey, no, that's an on-time flight. It pulled away from the gate. I was sitting out there. You can't get a drink. You can't do anything. You're sitting there. It's hot. I was so mad, and that's before laptops and all that, but I always had just exactly what you got, paper and pen in my briefcase. I started writing this column, and I wrote about, if this was Chicago, if this was Los Angeles or somewhere like that, I could understand. But I am in Podunk, Charlotte, North Carolina. Boy, the column ran. It mentioned Podunk, Charlotte, North Carolina.
Fighting words.
Couple of, 3 or 4 days later, I get a couple of letters from North Carolina, and they just got a clipping in there from a guy, their columnist was Alan Norwood. And he writes about this clown over in Knoxville, writing about how we're Podunk. Let me tell you about Podunk. And I could tell by reading it, he had a Knoxville connection, yeah. And he had a relative that had gone to the University of Tennessee. And he wrote a scathing, again, fun column, but just scathing column about Knoxville. Well, I had to answer it, of course. And it wasn't a daily type thing, but maybe twice a month we would exchange. Never, ever once did Alan Norwood and I communicate by telephone, well, there was no email. We never personally interacted. We just relied on columns back and forth. And finally, and it had gone on for about 6-8 months, something like that. It's time to kill this thing. You know, it's run its course. So I drove up to the state line in North Carolina there, and I found a spot right up there in Hartford, you know, where they had it. And I found a spot we could pull off and all that. And I went back and I wrote this column, and it appeared on a Sunday. And I said, it's time that we bury the hatchet. And I went and bought a country ham and a bottle of Jack Daniel's whiskey. And I had a friend carve me out a thing with a hatchet buried in a stump and all this. And I said, next Sunday, somebody get a hold of Alan and tell him that next Sunday I'll meet him at mile marker whatever, and we will officially have the truce and all that kind of stuff. And it was going to be, you know, I said, I'll meet him next Sunday. Column ran. Fine. Friday of that week, I get into my office, and the mailbox is like a porcupine with letters sticking out of it. I opened the first couple of them, and it's an Alan Norwood column. And it said, somebody please get a hold of Sam Venable and tell him I would be happy to meet him and bury the hatchet, but I ain't going to be up there. I'll be on vacation. And we have a condo in Myrtle Beach, and I'll be down there. And if he's interested, you know, condo number is such and such and such and such, and I'll meet him there at 2 o'clock or whatever. I walked out, and this is Friday afternoon, and this is how the fun days of newspapering were. I walked it in there, and I pitched it down on the editor's desk, and I said, Harry, what do you think about this? And he looked at it, he kind of chuckled, and he says, looks to me like you're going to be catching a plane Sunday morning. I said, that's all I need to know. Caught a plane, flew to Myrtle Beach, rented a car, and literally, I am driving up that highway, 17 or whatever it is. I'm holding this column for Pete's sake. And I said, go up here and you'll see there's a Shell station, turn, and I turned there. And I got to the condo complex there about 10 minutes early, and I drove and drove until I found exactly, I could see the number up there. But I just parked and I sat there and waited, you know. And right at the time, I just walked up to the door. I knocked on the door. Immediately it opened. He said, I knew you'd be here. And see, those were the fun days. Mankind. And yeah, we went out into the surf and then we presented the thing. And, he came back and brought cheer wine and all this kind of stuff. So it was fun.
I mean, as I said earlier, I am impressed and jealous. That it's just not like that anymore in the journalism world. No.
I feel so fortunate and so blessed to have just fallen in instead of being out there measuring trees and boarding feet and all that, and tagging waterfowl or, you know, trapping deer to move somewhere. I got to just go do whatever I wanted to do. I know, and you know, as a journalist, you know how rare that is today.
Yeah.
And all I can do is thank my lucky stars that it turned out that way.
Well, we're lucky to get to hear you talk
Well,
about it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing your stories.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for braving the rain.
Yes, thank you so much.
All right. And if anybody is just, if your money or your credit card is just burning a hole in your pocket, or you have a friend you don't care much about, but their birthday's coming up soon and you want a cheap present, I'll be happy to sign it for you. But thank you so much for coming over. This really means a lot. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, that halftime show was, this week. exactly. Yeah. Oh, it's very funny. My wife, we've been married 56 years in April. And we are the polar opposites. I mean, she is a mathematician. She's a retired IT instructor. We have two children. Clay is just like his mother. They're both quiet. And they're funny, but quiet. Clay's an electrical engineer. Our daughter Megan, our daughter Megan is cut out of the same mold. The biggest clown, funny, but the most caring human.